Welcome everyone to Chit Chat, where our motto is get your chit together. Chit means enlightened awareness, how to remove the impositions that cripple our awareness so that chit can manifest is what we at least try to talk about here on Chit Chat. I'm Jaya. Here with me is Kishore. And we have a nice topic for you today. Kishore, what is it? Actually, I came up with the topic. I'll say it.
You came up with the topic. Yeah, you please share.
The topic, we titled today's topic as sex, race, and a bad day. And how these three are connected will become a little bit more obvious in the course of the conversation. We want to talk about we're not really going to talk about this per se, but it's inspired by, inspired is probably not the most accurate word to use here because it's a pretty dark thing, but what motivates this conversation is a murder happened less than a week ago. Not a murder, 8 murders, 6 of whom of the victims were Asian women, were murdered in Atlanta, Georgia by a young white male who loved God and guns. According to the article that I read, they somehow just threw that in there. He loved God and guns. I guess maybe wanting to inform us that he's probably of the crazed Republican type. Anyway, this is from a BBC article that I saw. And following the murder of particularly these Asian women, the hashtag Stop Asian Hate has been trending. And this, I guess, because this scenario has been read as racism, as motivated by racism. And this, not only is it, I think there's been an uptick of Asian murders since the spread of the coronavirus. There's been a lot of anti-Asian rhetoric following the coronavirus outbreak, because the coronavirus outbreak, came from Wuhan, China. And so there's been all this anti-Asian rhetoric. And following that rhetoric, there seems to be an uptick in Asian murders. And therefore, how else is a murder of Asian women in America by a white male to be read other than as motivated by racism? And so Stop Asian Hate has been the predominating sort of crying war cry. In response to these murders, there have been a lot of gatherings. I just saw an image in New York. Union Square was a huge gathering, and protests have been happening to bring people more and more awareness of the Asian violence that's going on in the country. Why I want to talk about it is a little bit different than the status quo that seems to come up around this conversation. And what's interesting for me is, I think what's interesting for me is that the motivation is being read as racism against his denial of racist intentions. And it seems, I don't know if I've seen this or I've just heard this from someone. I probably just have heard this from someone, but I wouldn't be surprised to see this on Twitter. I guess you don't decide your motivations anymore. Your actions do, which is like very weird logic. It seems to make sense prima facie, but I've heard this, I don't know how true this is, but in murder cases, the hardest thing to discover is the motivations of a person, because the actions are outside, the motivations are inside. So what are actually the motivations of an individual? And so although he's denied racist intent in the execution of these crimes, the social media mob remains unabated because your actions obviously incontrovertibly prove that you are racist. How do they incontrovertibly prove that he's racist? Well, he's white, and the people he killed were Asian. So there's no other way to read that. And I find that to be obviously logically fallacious, but I also find it interesting that this has been the thing that's been grabbed onto at an almost total eclipse of his actual expression of motivation for doing the crimes. At least in this BBC article, they didn't give any direct statement of his, but according to the cops that were interviewed also, apparently he had a sex addiction. And they're still trying to determine if he was like a, what do you call it? Like a customer at some of these massage places that he goes. Now, I don't know about this personally, but I have heard from all my friends, and particularly I remember the first time hearing about this was in Chicago. One of my friends has been trained to be a masseuse, and he told me about this sort of funny business that goes on in these, which is like common practice basically. And then I come to New York, and my friends, they inform me what's going on behind closed doors in these massage shops. So they're trying to determine if he was like maybe a customer of something extra that was happening at the massage parlor. But the mayor of Georgia wanted to be sure that there would be no such narratives created where victim blaming could take place, you know, and that, well, these people were running like a backdoor prostitution ring and therefore XYZ and therefore victim blaming. So they kind of like shut down any sort of indication of that being part of the fuller story. But it is at least mentioned in the article twice that he had a sex addiction. And I find that part to be more interesting because it leads to a conversation that you never really hear about in mainstream culture. And you hardly ever hear about it, even in alternative culture, let's say counterculture, is the relationship between sexual addiction or sexual, let's say, perversion and like violence. That's something that's not talked about really at all. And could there be a relationship between his admittance of sexual addiction and the crimes that he committed? In the article, the police officer said that he admitted to having a sexual addiction and he wanted to eliminate the problem. Now I've seen this because we know we have men's groups and where guys are sharing their, you know, struggles in the sexual addiction department also. And it's come up on more than one occasion that, you know, where you have these like moments of like profound frustration and disgust and in such a subjective space, you just like smash your phone or smash your computer. I even know one story of one guy a religious guy who had been struggling with pornography for a long time. And he took a sledgehammer and smashed his computer. I don't know how that worked out for him in the long run. But just the idea that he was just so frustrated with this sort of problem that he took a very violent and drastic measure against his computer. Now, it doesn't seem too far off that someone might take a violent and drastic measure against other people they see as the problem. Obviously, the problem is within. But the fact that that part is almost completely dismissed or glossed over or obfuscated in favor of this other narrative, which is also possible, but is not confirmed. That for me is a more interesting conversation. Why don't we want to talk about this part? And final thoughts here. Why the bad day came in our article is because one of the police officers in the interview said, almost as if he was sympathizing with the murderer, you know, he was just having a bad day. Like, I have bad days on the regular. People don't end up dead when I have a bad day. So I think you're going to have to do a little bit better in explaining the scenario than he was just having a bad day. There's obviously something deeper that's going on there. And it seems that there's something deeper if the admittance of the murderer is to be believed. That something deeper has to do with sexual addiction and less to do with racism. Anyway, so that's a synopsis of the scenario and the motivation for this conversation. Let's get it going. What are you hearing so far in all this?
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting topic, and I just like feel already that we're gonna get into it because you and I sometimes differ on these things, but for the most part, we agree on most things. I think it's really simplistic to say it was, you know, I agree with you in that sense. Like, it's really simplistic to just be like, oh, it was racism, and that's it, the end, you know? And I think I've also was reading the articles, and just there were like one or two lines mentioning his sexual addiction. I also even saw that they mentioned that like he was maybe planning to go to a porn shop that he had frequented before to do something similar there, because like that sense of retribution or that sense of eliminating the problem or something like this. However, you know, so in that way, I think that like, yeah, just saying that it's racist is like probably quite reductive. But then I feel like race, unfortunately, has been in a way like subsumed into the like sex violence vacuum that exists, because I think because I will because I think that this idea that we've spoken about a lot on Chit Chat, this idea that's from the Vedas, from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Jivo Jivasya Jivanam, right? That one living being is food for another. Like, if we don't take to spiritual life, we're just going to be trying to dominate one another. All it matters is whoever's in power, and if I have the power, then you're the little person and I'm going to stomp all over you. And we see that happening. Okay, sorry to bring this up, but this is a ridiculous example, but I really like this example because it just shows the times that we're living in. And I'm going off on a little tangent, but just bear with me. So Kylie Jenner, I don't know if you heard this, but Kylie Jenner, who is like one of the Jenners, you know, she's like Kim Kardashian's sister, like whatever, I don't know. She's like a billionaire.
Okay.
She is a billionaire. And apparently her makeup artist got into a car accident. And he was going to need like full like brain surgery, reconstructive face, like all of the works, right?
Ooh.
And the surgery was going to cost $60,000. So Kylie Jenner goes on GoFundMe or one of these things and asks her fans and asks her fans to donate money for him. And then finally, she ends up herself out of her own pocket, generously giving $5,000.
Oh, shit.
And I feel like that's just such a perfect example of like, no matter how good you think you are with like the upper echelons of society, or no matter how like much you've worked to like reach that upper echelon of society, if there's no spiritual principle, then it's jivo jivasya jivanam. Oh, you got into a car accident and you're basically dead. Sorry, you know, that's going to be the mood. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because I feel like this sex, race, violence thing really goes back along. I mean, it's probably existed for time immemorial, but what I'm just thinking of right now is like colonialism and like how so much of the, what's it called? So much of the methodology used to conquer people was violence and rape. Like that was the methodology used to like conquer a people. And I think it doesn't necessarily, see, this is the thing. I don't think it matters in a sense of like race. I think it matters in a sense of like who has the power, right? So of course that's going to get like the news and whatever, they're going to twist it into like, this is all about race. But I think it just comes down to, unfortunately, right now, what is seen is that white people have the power. So it's, you know, white people are racist and whatever, and et cetera, and this. But obviously, in different times in history, different people had the power, right? And so I think it's more about just the dehumanization of others, right? And so whether I'm dehumanizing a person that is white, or dehumanizing a person that is black, or dehumanizing a person that is Asian, whatever it may be, the main process is the dehumanization, right? I'm looking at you as an object for me to dominate, for me to take pleasure out of, and for me eventually to kill, right? Like that's like, you're an object and I'm not seeing you as a soul. I'm seeing you as a thing for my own pleasure. And when you don't give me pleasure anymore, you're disposable, right? I think that the race thing just gets tied into it, unfortunately, because of the very messy history of like the modern world. Like it's messy AF, you know? And I don't really know what, you know, I don't have any answers for any of that kind of stuff. But I will say that one thing is that I think that in places like big cities, like Atlanta, you know, Atlanta's a big city, or New York City is a big city. And this is me totally speculating, but I'm just gonna do it. It's not a this is like my opinion. This is like what I'm observing. I feel like when there's a lot of segregation of race, it can be a good thing because it's a protection zone, right? Like I go to this section of the city and it's all Asian, and therefore I feel safe because I am Asian. Or I go to this section of the city and it's, you know, all black, and I feel safe because these are my people, you know, etc. Right? The Hispanic section, the gay section, the Russian, whatever it may be, right? So that makes sense. There's like an upside in that sense of like, I feel that safety if I am a minority, but it also creates a lot of like, I don't know, it creates a lot of like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like being able to consume a product in a sense. Like I'm talking about modern times, because back in the day, maybe 30 years ago, if I was a white person, I probably wouldn't go to like, let me go back more. Maybe like 50 years ago, if I'm a white person, right, in New York, I'm probably not going to go to like Crown Heights, right? Like that's not what you're going to do. But nowadays it's like, yes, people are traveling this and this and this and etc. I think that what tends to happen is like when we look at people as a product to consume, right? So if it's an Asian person at a massage parlor, I am consuming you as a product, right? If it's a black person who, I don't know, I'm going to use a bad stereotype. If it's a black person who does hair, I'm going to go to that hair parlor and I'm consuming you as a product. If you're a Hispanic person who makes my Mexican food, I'm going to that part of the town to consume that product. And I'm having like this kind of like really effed up, sorry for my language, like really effed up like cultural experience. I don't know if this makes sense what I'm saying, but it's like I'm just like consuming that, right? Like I don't know who that person is. I don't know what their problem is. Maybe I have a sex addiction. What addictions do they have? What problems do they have, you know? So all that matters is like my locus of consciousness, right? Like they don't matter. That person who makes my taco doesn't matter. The person who gives me a massage doesn't matter. And I think, unfortunately, and I'm going to final points because I realize I've been talking for a long time. I think, unfortunately, regardless of this person saying that he was into guns and God, which I mean, come on. Come on. I mean, if you don't have a real spiritual practice, and I think that like that's why, you know, we can talk about this a little bit more, but in our practice of bhakti, practice sadhana is so, you know, it's such a big focus because it's like I can say that I have a belief, I can say that I like God.
Oh no. Okay, we'll try to hold space until he comes back. I'm going to reflect what I think I was hearing until he returns, and hopefully he returns. What I think I was hearing is that the soul that is embodied in this world has a consumption problem. And we try to consume. Consumption means we want to enjoy objects of this world. So in our frenzy to consume, we strip things of this world of their okay, I'm trying to reflect what I think I was hearing from you. Shall I continue?
Thank you. I don't know. Yeah. I had already
said your piece.
I had already kind of finished my, yeah, said my piece. So please, sorry, my connection just like switched off, but thankfully it came right back on. So go for it.
So what I'm hearing fundamentally is that the soul that's embodied has a consumption problem. And in our frenzy to consume the objects of this world, we strip them of any inherent meaning for themselves. Now, when it comes to inanimate objects like a computer or a video game, so that's not really problematic because they don't have any inherent meaning because they're not subjects. But that consumption problem or that stripping away of inherent meaning extends to animate objects also, such as people. And so once you're able to strip them of their inherent meaning, that means they have no meaning for themselves. Like objects, they only have meaning for you. Then you can exploit them for your own enjoyment. You can consume them. And whether that consumption happens economically or happens, like in this case, with murder or rape, but you're just an object. You have no inherent meaning. I can enjoy you. So those who have this consumption problem, if they're in a position of power, they're going to do really horrible things. And I guess as a sidebar, this is why in leadership training, you have to really train people not to view the world outside of your own subjective experience as devoid of inherent value, or say it the other way, looking at everything as valuable only in relationship to you. You have to really train the mind not to do that. So we haven't received that training. So we all have that problem more or less, but those in a position of power, they're going to be highlighted because they're in a position of power. This person, because he's white embodied, the soul is in a white body. So just in this country, I'm still reflecting here. So in this country, he's considered he has a power position. His race itself is generating something like a power position. Now, how much power he as an individual actually has, I think people will argue about that, and they would be right to do so, I think also. But just as a general cultural point, there's a power dynamic that's there. And and also he uses that power. Of course, it really manifested practically in the form of a gun. And then he consumed this, in this case, in the form of murder. he consumed the product, so to speak. And so unless you give people spiritual training where they learn how to circumvent this tendency to strip the world around them of inherent meaning, then you're going to see more of the same. And so the real solution to a scenario like this on a most fundamental level is people need training how to see the world outside of themselves as having inherent meaning. And I would say, I think that becomes obvious when it comes to animate people. I think it even extends to the environment, even though, because the tendency is to look at it impersonally and then exploit her in ways that are causing terrible damage to the world. So there has to be training how to look at everything outside of you, including the environment, which appears to be inanimate to our perspective, to our perception. Learn how to see it as having inherent value and then relate according to the inherent value or inherent dignity of that thing or of that person. Until we get such training, then we're bound to see, these sorts of things come up again and again. All right, that's me reflecting. You like how I reflected?
I like how you reflected. And I also like one thing that I didn't touch on was the sex addiction, because I think that that's such a main factor of this consumption situation, because in this sense, it was more like his consumption process was go visiting the massage parlors or visiting the porn shops or whatever he did on his computer, right? That was the consuming. And it's more like the murders were more of like a catharsis in its natural meaning of this word. So a lot of the times people think that this word catharsis means like, I just had a cathartic experience. I feel so much better after I took that yoga class. But I think I've talked about this before on Chit Chat, whereas in ancient Greek society, theater was a huge part of the society. And like the whole civilization, the whole society had to come and watch this theater, right? Oedipus Rex, where he gouges out his eyes and has sex with his mother, and it's like all these like terrible, awful things. But the whole point of it was that the catharsis, the actual word catharsis, meant that it was meant to purge the society of their ailment. So maybe them thinking, maybe this playwright, right, Oedipus, he's not the playwright, right? Sorry, Sophocles, the playwright, maybe saw something in society where he was like, I'm seeing this trend coming up of some weird sex addictions towards mothers. So I'm gonna write this Oedipus Rex play where I show them how bad it is, right? And then the people at large, the public, they see the play, and the whole theory was that they get purged. So I don't think that we really have something like that nowadays. People live riddled by their addictions without any way of purging them, of transmuting them, of speaking about them.
So then it manifests in like a really gross and terrible way.
Exactly.
Because of not having the tools. I think that's a really good point. And unfortunately, I think if we were to make this point, and let's say in like a public discourse, like this is a public discourse, but let's say we were like popular influencers or something, and we're to make this point, I think we might be attacked as someone sympathizing with the murderer. Like he didn't have healthy ways of purging himself of the elements of the soul, so to speak. And therefore, not having access to the tools by which he could do so, he took a very drastic measure and made a terrible mistake that cost the lives of 8 people. I think it's a very super excellent point, but I think they would see us as sympathizers with the perpetrator, and therefore would find it somewhat unpalatable. But I want to stick on that a little bit, because I like the unpalatable position, because I like drama and tea and gossip and all that. But jokes aside, seriously speaking, I think the general society, like those who would jump on social media and jump on the Stop Asian Hate bandwagon, I think in a lot of ways they see themselves as also wanting to purge the society of a particular terrible ailment, namely racism in this particular case. And so they have these same kind of motivation in that sense. But we're also saying the same thing in that sense. Like, we need better tools for purging the world of these elements. I guess, like in the case of the murderer in this case, those who would jump on the stop Asian hate bandwagon, they also don't have the tools by which to purge the society of the element. Okay, let's take for granted that we jump on board. Like, racism is a problem. I don't really believe it's the problem it's purported to be today, but that's another topic for another day. But let's just take for granted that it is. What is the tool required to purge the society of the element? Is it really large protests? Does that really accomplish the purging of this element from the society? Is that really the solution? Is becoming, frankly speaking, vindictive. I mean, because a lot of these protests, at least the ones that you can see on Twitter and so on, they do not look like the peaceful protests, and maybe they're not intended to be. Maybe they have a right to feel anger. They have a right to feel fury, and I would even say that makes sense to me too. But is that anger and fury going to purge the society of that element? That's really at the heart of the conversation. Then, what is the most effective means of purging society of these? What the word in Sanskrit is mala. The mala means, like, generally translated as dirtiness or contamination in the heart, contamination in the soul. What is a tool for purging the society of those elements? I don't think the modern society really has the answers. And so you have protests, which seem to accomplish nothing in my perspective. I mean, they increase awareness, but I think that increased awareness is also part of the problem, frankly speaking. Because if you increase the awareness to a problem that people don't have tools to deal with, how do you help the problem? Rather, it seems to me that you expand it. So I often hear that I say, well, at least you increase the awareness. I'm like, that doesn't look like it's helping. Because I still don't know. I'm aware now, but I still don't have the tools to deal with it. So the secular world just doesn't seem to have the tools to deal with these issues. And therefore, what is the value of these things? Now, let's come back to our guy we're sympathizing with. We're not fully sympathizing. I'm sympathizing with him. I have a men's group. I know personally and vicariously what it means to struggle with sexual addiction. When you don't have the tools, or maybe you do, but they don't seem to be working too well. Like, people join religious organizations, or they join, what do you call them? Like AA groups or SA groups, where they can deal with their addictions, and they don't always, maybe those tools don't seem to be helping for a time period. So the frustration that comes from not being able to solve your problem, your inner problem, leads to, like, this sort of thing happening outside.
I think that it's very frustrating to not be able to solve your inner problem. And I think even more frustrating than not being able to solve it is not knowing where you can take shelter and where you can feel safe to be able to even solve that problem in the first place. Right. And I think that, I agree with you that modern society, current society, does not have the tools to purge the society of certain ailments. In our bhakti context, we would say chant Hare Krishna, take the devotional service, sit in front of the deity, like cleanse your heart. Like, that kind of stuff doesn't, like, really exist in a secular world, right? And even in a pseudo religious world, and I'm using that word pseudo because a lot of people do grow up with, like, pseudo Christianity or pseudo Judaism or whatever religion that they're ascribing to. Well, usually they're not ascribing to it. It's their families, and they're kind of just, like, along for the ride,
Right.
And I think that that's really problematic, because also you lose a lot of faith in, religious organizations. And I also don't want to, like, just say spirituality is the answer or religion's the answer, because a lot of people, when they hear something like that, they're like, whoa, excuse me. I saw something recently that, like, I mean, it was in the form of memes, because that's how I like to take my news, or else it's too depressing.
Oh my God.
But someone was saying, like, it was like a meme about, like, gay people being like, oh, the church is going to tell me how to act or something like that. And I don't know, like, if you saw, like, 2 weeks ago, like, it came out confirmed that there was, like, 65 1,000 cases of like the church against sexual abuse towards minors.
Oh
And
my.
it's just like, how do we even begin to digest something like that, you know? So it's like, I can totally understand how convoluted this issue is, because not only do people struggle with sexual issues, whether that be addiction or orientation or like whatever, you know,
Right, right.
but then it's like, who do I even believe? Who do I even talk to about this kind of stuff? You know, there's
Mm,
still a stigma in most of the world, I would say, that going to a therapist is like only if you have mental issues, you know, like I'm
mm,
fine, I don't need to go to a therapist, this kind of stuff. And personally, I've gone to a lot of therapy and it's great, but also I don't know if it's exactly the right tool to purge society of its issues, you know?
right.
And I think, you know, I'll end here, because I think the problem becomes that it's very much like we people and society see each other on two different sides. It's like
Mm,
either you're on the right side of history or you're on the wrong side of history. If you think
yeah,
that racism is not a problem, then you're dehumanized in my eyes and you're over there, you know? Or if
right.
you think that, you know, I don't know, if you think Trump isn't great, then you're dehumanized in my eyes and you're over there. And it's these two really unfortunate sides that have been created. I really like what Shikshastika Das is he's placing a lot of Bhagavatam quotes. And so I like
Yeah.
this one. I'm just going to put it up. He says, Lord Kapila Dev says this: as the blazing fire of death, I cause great fear to whoever makes the least discrimination between himself and other living entities because of a differential outlook. And I really like this because, you know, in Bhagavatam, obviously Lord Kapila Dev is just saying this, but also in Bhagavad Gita, it's speaking
Mm,
a lot about like the realized person and how they see you know, how they see everything as the same, whether it be a stone, whether it be gold, right? Like they're just seeing everything as the same. And the thing is that whenever I read this section of Bhagavad Gita, because there are other parts as well, I'll treat that person the same if they're a dog eater, if they're a Brahmin, if they're an outcast, whatever. But this is like a pure devotee who has achieved some sort of liberation in this life, which I myself am not. I don't know that many people that are. And I think that it's very difficult to achieve that level without having like strict practice. I'm gonna go off into a little tangent.
uh,
Sorry. I'm almost done. I'm almost done. I think the idea of also like, how do I put this? I think there's a
keep it
lot.
playing. Keep it
I
playing.
think I will. I think there's also a lot of like not, and I think that this is why people on the other side. So let's define the sides, right? The sides are you're in power, right? Probably white race, probably in the United States, right? Or like Europe or whatever, right? So this is
Yeah.
power. And the
Okay.
other side is people of color, whatever, you know, sexual, different orientations, etc. So these are the two sides.
Okay.
And I think that people get angry on both sides at each other because there are no tools of purging their specific ails, right? So we've already covered that. But I think what people get really angry at, and I really want to hear your take on this because I know that you have personal experience with this. I think what
Okay.
people on the person of color side or the sexual, you know, different orientation side, or whatever it may be, right? Like minority, let's use this word, the minority versus the majority, is
Okay.
that the minority a lot of the time feels like, yo, I've been through a lot. Like I've if I tried to walk into a store with a gun, they'd shoot me dead. When I was a kid, if I said the F word to my mom, she'd take a belt and smack me across the face. You know, like there's a lot of this kind of rhetoric.
Mm,
Whereas they see, and it's not always the truth. That's why it's more of a generalization. I think a
right.
lot of the generalization is that they see that the other side, perhaps there's not so much punitive measures, whether it's growing up punitively, right, in a white middle class America family, right, or whether it's as a grown up now, adults in the society, that law enforcement is not taking those punitive measures, right? You see all these memes of like, oh, if it were a black person, or if it was this
Right.
person, if it was that
Right.
person. And
Right.
I'm personally remembering your story, and I have many stories like this too. I almost want you to tell the story, but just the story of just like, you know, how growing up as a person of color, maybe you go to a friend's house that's a white person and you see the way that they treat their family basically, and you're just like,
Taking it
excuse
back.
me? Yeah, you're
Right.
taken aback. And I think that causes even more friction. And I'm going to end with this point. I believe that there needs to be cathartic purging processes for each group in a secular sense. Obviously, the bigger answer would be like, come to Bhakti Yoga and practice devotional service. But not everyone is going to do that. So I don't think that it can just be like, we're going to have a protest and it's going to fix everything. I do think that there needs to be like specific tools for those, you know, white people that are having sexual addictions for Asian minorities. And I also think that there, and I also think that there needs to be tools for the Asian people who are on the receiving end of that, and they're having their own traumas around that. I think that that's a really tall order, though, and I think that that's very idealistic. So I don't know how that really goes about.
I've read this statement more than once on Chit Chat and practically everywhere where I've gotten to speak. It's my favorite go-to Thomas Merton quote. Before I read it again, I'm going to read a little bit further than I normally do. I like to preface it by saying that most issues, they have metaphysical problems at their core. And because there's such a strong split between what's obvious to us, you know, the physical, and what's not obvious to us, the metaphysical, like literally underlying the physical, that split between the two is leading to this schism in the soul. Like, in other words, you're a soul having a human experience, but you don't know that. You don't know that you're a soul having a human experience. You think that you're a human. And, you know, metaphysics, and whether that was like religion filling that void or people became more philosophical, you got to understand that there were more metaphysical aspects to your existence in this world. It wasn't all physical. And with understanding of the metaphysics, you would get, maybe I would like to say, intuitive insight for what you might do to heal the schism or that divide between, you know, spirit and matter. Ultimately, and I, you know, liking the quotes from Shishashika Das here also, he's quoting one of my favorite sections of the Bhagavatam, where at the root of the problem, at least as identified by Kapila Muni in this section, is the separateness problem, termed as pratak bhava or prataktva. You know, in other words, we don't see the integrating substratum of existence that actually interlinks everything, all souls and all matter. We're separated from that integrating universal substratum, which is God, basically, to keep it simple. And so being separate from that, we're alienated from that entity, looking at an alienated world. And therefore, what follows such a vision of the world is the exploitation, as we've described in the first part of our chit chat. So religion, or philosophy even in general, is supposed to take the place of helping us to look deeper beyond the physical, and then in discovering that deeper aspect of existence, starting to heal that schism. So unfortunately, as well-intentioned as people may be, it's like empty. It's like a gun with blanks in it. You know, it's loud, it's big, maybe, but it's ultimately useless. And I would be a little bit more careful if I wasn't in this safe space that I'm in right now without any problem in how I say that. But I think it's ultimately useless. And so that's my preamble. I'm going to read the statement. You've heard it many times. I'm going to read it again. It's just, for me, it's a powerful statement. This is Thomas Merton commenting on Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita, which he appreciated very much. And he makes this particular statement in the course of his, I'm going to read the whole thing. It's, the whole little section here is very beautiful. Listen carefully. I know it's hard to hear people reading, especially me, because my voice is terrible, but just be with me. Swami Bhaktivedanta brings to the West a solitary reminder that our highly activistic and one-sided culture is faced with a crisis that may end in self-destruction. Not may, it's happening right before our eyes. Why will it end in self-destruction? Because it lacks the inner depth of an authentic metaphysical consciousness. You know, just saying things like equality and be the best version of yourself. That's not an authentic metaphysical conscious, that's a slogan. We're going to have to do a little bit better than slogans if we want to heal the schisms in the soul. It's going to take more than that. It's going to take like thoughtful persons, Moonies, articulating a philosophy basically that integrates all aspects of our being. Slogans are just not going to cut it. That's one of my biggest pet peeves with a lot of these like self-help and new age gurus today. It's like kind of like a lot of it is about like slogans because you got to sell yourself on social media. So it's like about, I'm not going to listen to like a 5-minute video that's breaking down some like actual theology or some actual ontology. I'm going to, you know, get that one positive quote and share it. So we lack an authentic metaphysical consciousness. So what's going to happen? This is his words. It's very prophetic. It will end in self-destruction. Okay, he goes on to say here, without such depth of a metaphysical consciousness, our moral and political protestations are just so much verbiage. Very heavy, very true. How I personally, and I did a 100-day challenge. I started it. I'm moving slow AF, but I started it. My first video, I mentioned that it's been hard for me to want to say anything in the social media world or whatever, because you just don't know what's the point. It's just like another vibration contributing to the clamor of sounds, which is creating like a wilderness that is blocking anything true and authentic from shining through. It's just like very bewildering and confusing. But he's making this point. It's just so much useless verbiage unless you actually discover an authentic metaphysical consciousness. Okay, a little bit more here. It goes on to say, I just really love this. I read the part. So if in the West, God can no longer be experienced as other than dead, I guess that's a Lord, what do you call it?
Illusion? Reference?
A reference, basically. It's another word that begins with an A. To Nietzsche's God is dead.
Yes.
So if in the West, God can no longer be experienced as other than dead, it is because of an inner split and self-alienation that have characterized the Western mind and its single-minded dedication to only half of life, that which is exterior, objective, and quantitative. The death of God and the consequent death of a genuine moral sense, respect for life, for humanity, for value, has expressed the death of an inner subjective quality of life, a quality that in the traditional religions was experienced in terms of God consciousness, not concentration on an idea or concept of God necessarily, but a sense of presence, of an ultimate ground of reality and meaning from which life and love can spontaneously flower. I mean, that's just a very, very powerful statement. And unfortunately, as I look out at the world with all these social movements, or as I look at this, and I'm going to say it, this poor white guy who committed these atrocious activities, I think he's equally poor in this situation. He's a perpetrator, no doubt, but that doesn't mean perpetrators aren't also victims of their own ignorance, you know? And whether it's just one poor, ignorant fellow like him, or it's a mass of ignorant people, don't take this the wrong way, y'all, but a mass of ignorant people having large gatherings and protests together. At the end of the day, ignorance leads to suffering. And we can't solve that problem without discovery of that integrating ground of all being. And you know, and that's when the religious talk or this, you know, the philosophy talk, and that's where this can play a vital role in healing the schisms, you can say, of the soul. But as long as the world remains a little bit turned away from that, which is how we actually, it's so interesting that our philosophy actually identifies this as the core problem, which we call Bhagavat Vaimukya, which literally means turned away from God, that ground of all being. As long as we're turned our back on that, I mean, go on doing what you're doing, fine, but it's not going to be a solution. So it's hard for me to appreciate. I mean, I appreciate, like on a conventional level, I do appreciate like people are upset and they want to do something that they feel is good. But I'm like, y'all, we's ignorant. Like
Mm-hmm.
we's like real ignorant.
Mm,
And unless we solve that problem, which is a metaphysical problem,
mm.
fundamentally, you're
This
kind of
is
like wasting your time. I mean, yeah.
yeah. This is why on Chit Chat when our little slogan at the beginning is that we're here to get our chit together, right? So it's not like me pontificating about what you need to do or what this person needs to do. It's like we're really trying to make this a space for us to come together and speak about like what we as individuals need to do, and that's really where the work starts. And I love what you're saying about the ground of all being. David Madhava was like integrating ground of all being, and I also like what Madhava
Yeah,
Puri.
I like throwing a little poetry, a
That's
little
yeah, that's
yeah.
very nice, and I think that also is pointing a little bit to what Madhava Puri was saying. I feel in the very least we can strive for a radical centrism that empowers us to always use Krishna, God, as the central mass, right? So I'm getting that ground of all being
I'm
language kind of
stealing that.
that
I'm
that
stealing that, Michael.
central that central mass gravity of our morality. It's not as
Ooh.
exciting, but more practical and sustainable. And I think Madhava Puri really hit on something here, that it's not as exciting.
Can I read my other
And
quote? I gotta read it.
go read it.
Just because you're about to make that point. It's a Huxley point, and I've read it before.
You
Happiness
know
is
what point I'm about to make.
well, this is a quote from Huxley. He says here, and being contented within has none of the glamour of a good fight against misfortune,
Mm,
none of the picturesqueness of a struggle with temptation or a fatal overthrow by passion or doubt. Happiness is never grand.
mm,
Yeah, the first part of the quote, he says, actual happiness looks pretty squalid in comparison with the overcompensation for misery.
oof.
And of course, stability isn't nearly so spectacular as instability.
Mm,
And then
mm.
and that quote is, as I read, happiness is never grand. So just, yeah, you reminded me of that. Such a good quote.
Yeah, we've talked about this point many times, and you've mentioned that quote, and I love that quote because it really is also one of the things that's kind of at the heart of the problem. So perhaps we can understand that there needs to be this like integrating the ground of all being, or Madhava Puri's language, this radical centrism. Okay, we all need to come together under a certain thing, under a certain moral compass, to know that there is this underlying energy, whatever you want to call it, right? Soul, jiva, that is connecting us, paramatma, that is connecting us all. I think the problem becomes that we, going back to the consumption model, is that if things are not sensationalized, then it's boring and people don't want to talk about it. I mean, it's that simple. It's that simple. And I think and I think that this is where this point gets really like gritty and really like sad and nasty, is that the murders and this kind of behavior in itself is a sensationalized, all the coverage of it is a sensationalized thing that people are further sensationalizing and further creating the problem and further creating the separation, right? So it's like, I think that by doing the hashtag, or I think by going to the mass protest, exactly.
Stability ain't sexy enough. Oh
No,
my God, dude. I'm
we have to
still in
make
that.
stability. We have to make stability sexy again. We have to do it.
Make stability sexy again. Right.
So yeah, so like you're going to these protests because you think that like it's the right thing to do, but I think the really like, and this is like really heady, this is like really meta, it's like you're participating in the sensationalization, I think that's a word, in the sensationalizing, you're participating in the sensationalizing of something that is like, you're just making the problem worse, basically.
Yeah, there's a nice quote. This is from Prahlad. I've mentioned it before. Dukoshadam ta api dukam. Actually, atadiyaham. I'll explain the whole line. But he says, dukkha oshadam, the remedy for dukkha, ta api dukam. The remedy for dukkha, now dukkha means suffering. So the remedy for suffering is itself suffering. And then he gives why this happens to us in our experience with this world. We see a problem, and then we try to apply the solution, and that application solution is itself suffering, which means it only helps to expand the ocean of tears the ocean of grief that is the experience of this material world. He gives a reason why this happens. He says, atat diyaham, because your diya, I think diya here means intelligence, it's translated as consciousness, is focused on atat, that which is not that. And the word tat here refers to consciousness, basically, Brahman or spiritual. So you're atat, that means you're focused on phenomenality. So because your consciousness is focused on that which is not spirit, not that integrating ground of all being, not that Krishna at the center, mass gravity. I love that, center mass gravity. It's atta, it's not on that. Therefore, your solution your solution for suffering is itself suffering. And it's just expanding the ocean of grief. And we have to admit, like, we look at like a movement like Black Lives Matter. Oops, I shouldn't have gave that example. I should have spoke too fast there. Anyway, when you look at any social movement, Black Lives Matter is just a recent example of one. Like on like an honest estimation, has it solved any problems? Okay, again, they say, well, it's got the conversation going. The conversation was already going and not improving. Now it's degrading. Like, what is it? Your solution is itself. So it's only expanding the ocean of grief. And because it is turned away from God, basically, or from, let's say we can use metaphysics for those who have a more secular sort of feeling to it.
I like Sheikh Shasta Das. He wrote this thing that we said, if things aren't sensationalized, it's boring. And then he writes, it's true, since the reality TV guy isn't present and president anymore, TV ratings have tanked. So no one's really everyone's kind of bored. It's like, okay, well, at least that was providing some sort of excitement, you know, at least it was providing some sort of like back and forth. I think also you touch on this a lot, and this idea, I don't know so much about it. I know kind of like the gist of it, but this idea of like rights in life and the hero's journey, and, you know, having to go through the trials and tribulations, and in that way, the catharsis of whatever needs to be purged from our self is purged through that journey. And so many people are, you know, basically everyone has negated that experience due to modern society nowadays. So we don't really have that. And just going back to this guy, you know, who killed the women, and I think there's many people who, the sad thing is that I think that there are many people like him that just haven't done the act of murder, but they're there. They're having the sexual addictions, they're having the violent thoughts, they're doing all that stuff. And again, I agree with you that if, you know, if it was a bigger public arena, people would think that we're sympathizing with the guy. But I feel like that just goes to show how radicalized the two sides have become, that we can't even think about like in this sense, it would be called like prisoner care or patient care, right? He's obviously has some sort of like mental illness, which is sexual addiction. And it's like, people can't even think that anymore. They're just like, no, he's white, he's the devil, he's this, and he's etc. So kill him or something, whatever, you know? And what was the point that I was making? I forgot. I lost my train of thought about, wait, what did I say right before that?
I lost it too. Now you put me on the spot.
No, I was saying
the rights. You were talking about the rights. And
the rights?
Rites of passage, and people have negated.
Oh yeah, the rites of passage. Yeah. Yes. So you know more about this than me, and it's like, I think that like, because people have been negated that journey, it's like we're stuck on our computers playing video games trying to live out that journey as a hero, or we're doing it through pornography to feel some sort of power in my life, or to feel like I've done that rite of passage, or whatever it might be, whatever addiction it is that's making me feel like I have some sort of power or control over my life, because I haven't gone through these rites of passage or this hero's journey. But I think you can speak more on this than me.
Yeah, I don't know if it's much more that can be said. I think Krishna summarizes it very simply and straightforwardly, that happiness and the mode of passion is like nectar in the beginning and poison in the end. So the happiness of the modern postmodern Western world is this rajasic happiness standard, where we were enjoying for a little while. We had our little porn, and we had our nice restaurants and clothing stores, and, you know, a life of sense gratification without a deeper sense of reality, without proper rites of passage, without a deeper metaphysics. And now it's culminating in sorrow.
Mm.
And it is likely only going to be more of the same, because that is the standard of the approach to happiness by the passionate mode.
Mm.
The mode of happiness and the mode of goodness, first of all, is grounded in practice, Christian mentions. And then he says the experience of it is like pain in the beginning, but in the end, it is like nectar. The pain part comes from actually having to go in the context of how you asked it, having to go on the journey and and slay your dragons and win the pot of gold. That part is hard and it's dangerous and it's scary, but in the end, Atma Prasadaja, it leads to the birth of an inner satisfaction, an inner purity, which from inside out, it starts to spread everywhere. And so this was the standard of a more spiritual culture, the standard of happiness of a more spiritual culture. And so you'll see like a lot of emphasis in these old world cultures on like duty, on hardship, basically, as the sort of method of entering into a more spacious realm of consciousness where suffering is much reduced because of your enlightened state. Not to say that there isn't suffering anymore, but it's like water on a lotus leaf. It can't really touch you because of your expanded awareness. Just like the analogy is given in Gita, Apurya Manam Achala Pratishnam, like there are many rivers entering into the ocean, and the ocean remains unmoved. And so you have all these things coming at you from the outer world, trying to influence your inner world, but you remain unmoved because of the wealth of the inner world, the broadness of that consciousness. And so people try to be deep without going deep. There's a slogan.
That's a good one.
Trying to be deep without going deep. All you got from me is a slogan. You don't have no deeper metaphysical consciousness. You haven't done any hardships to break out of the prison of ego. What you think was going to happen, homie? You thought you going to have a good time? What you think this place is? This place is for suffering. Of course.
I think that Anthony asked this really nice question, and I think this is a topic for another time, and it's a topic that we've talked about this topic a lot actually in the past, so maybe we can talk about it again later or not. But I like this question. I don't know if he's asking it sincerely or ironically, I'm not sure. But he goes, how to sensationalize authentic spirituality? And what I'm getting from that question is like, okay, if what works right now in this world, if what people respond to, unfortunately, is sensationalism, because that's how we've been conditioned in this current postmodern context, then how do we get people to pay attention to like a real spiritual process by perhaps sensationalizing it?
Yeah, just as a quick answer to this, and maybe this is something we could unpack later. I think that which is, there's a nice verse in the Gita, nasato vitate bhavo, not bhavo vitate sata. So that which is sat, or that which is asat, has no existence because it is here today, gone tomorrow. And that which is sat, or true, it has no non-existence because it was there in the past, it's here now, and it'll always be there in the future. So the asat is characterized by, here today, gone tomorrow. And sat, the things that are true, are characterized by its ability to resist the onslaught of non-existence. In other words, they continue to exist everlasting and forevermore. So I think authentic spirituality is truth. Now, truth, or you can say sattva. The word, this is maybe a good way of thinking about it. The word sattva means beingness. That's what it literally means. Sat means being, and twa is like ness, like filled with the quality of being. Now that beingness can be obfuscated by rajas. So rajas means dust, right? Like Brajaraj, the dust of Vrindavan. So rajas means dust. So sattva can be, obfuscated by rajas, and it can be eclipsed by tamas or darkness. But it is there. So I think authentic spirituality is like sat. It just stays there, right? And the nature of rajas and tamas, well, nature of the material world in general, but of things that are inauthentic is that it's here today and gone tomorrow. So I think what's really going to happen is that people are going to suffer like anything. It's coming. It's already, people are already suffering like anything in a lot of parts of the world. America's about to get theirs too. And I think what's going to happen at that time is that those who are really situated in truth, in Sat, they're called as Satam, right? The devotees are often called as Satam, meaning they're situated in Sat. So they invoke this power to resist the onslaught of non-existence. So I think what's going to happen is that suffering is going to be magnified like anything for whatever reason. It's going to smash all the illusions about a foolish culture of sense gratification. And then those pillars of Sat, the Satam, the true devotees, then it will become self-evident that that's where shelter is. And in that way, that's how spirituality will become sensational. It'll become like, I need actual shelter. And those who are situated in truth, they'll be able to be like beacons of light for that shelter. The real shelter is God, of course, but they'll be able to act as beacons of such a shelter. They themselves would be like that shelter because they're situated inside and they can resist non-existence. The rest of us playing around with our little Asat toys, whether they be animate or inanimate, then we have to suffer the consequences of our decision to play. And as we will suffer, so the world will suffer because everyone is playing that game now.
I love that response because I also agree. I think that things are going to get, I mean, not to be pessimistic, but
it's a world after world.
Like it doesn't seem to be going well, let's just just to mention, because Kavi is here and she said, how did I miss this hour? So if anyone's listening in from other countries, I'm also not in the United States because a lot of countries don't do daylight savings times. So the US did have daylight savings time, so adjust accordingly. It's 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So yeah, there was a time change. Sorry about that, Kavi. And I just wanted to give a little shout out to Priti because I liked her comment, but we didn't get into it. She said, until we let go of the bodily concept of life, and this is a whole other thing, but she puts it so beautifully. Until we let go of the bodily concept of life, we can't get out of these issues. And it seems the Vikarmis are edging out the Karmis who used to at least maintain social order. Go Kali Yuga.
Edge it out the Karmis. Sorry, that's wild.
It was good.
That's true.
And let's see, Shikshastika Das is saying, Devamrita Swami, who spent a lot of time in the Eastern Bloc communist countries, said that America is going to be very upset when their sense gratification is taken from them.
Yeah, no doubt.
It's in the process of happening. I think people are starting to realize that. And we have a question from Nahush. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. So should the intersection of tamas versus sattva be feared or rejoiced, as something bad has to be destroyed for the good to settle in?
I don't know if I fully understand the question, but the first thing that occurs to me intuitively hearing this question is that Krishna recommends just an equanimity of mind, right? Yoga sthakuru karmani sangam tattvadananjaya. Yoga samatvam yoga uchite. He says yoga means samatvam. So I like to think of it like this whenever I can think. Most of the time is playing around in the material energy like any other condition. So, but whenever I can step back from it and think, which is occasionally, I wish there was more occasions than one. The way I like to think about the experience of the gunas is they're like seasons moving in cycles. So as one just adjusts himself to the season of the time, and carry on with their actual purpose and activities, then in a similar way, should it be feared or rejoiced? It should be, in a sense, neither. It's just like the cycles of material nature are going on. I think what should be feared and or rejoiced, I would say I would fear losing that beacon of purpose or aim because of infatuation with the environment around me. That should be feared. And what should be rejoiced is progress toward that ultimate aim, however slow, however incremental, but moving in that should be rejoiced. And as far as the movement of the cycles of this world, cycles of prosperity, and then down to indigence, not only spiritually but practically also. That's just nature is just moving around. What can be done about that? So Krishna, he spends a lot of time in the Bhagavad Gita encouraging this sort of evenness of mind when it comes to the environment. And I think in the modern world they would use the word stoic to describe this evenness of mind. And stoicism, interestingly enough, is kind of on the rise, and the world is getting a little bit of a rise in popularity because it seems practical. And the idea with stoicism is that for the things that are outside of your control, you're stoic. Because they're outside of your control, there is no sense in investing more energy in those things than necessary, which is almost like zero energy. And then for the things that are within your power, which is basically just your choices, is not much more than that that's within your control, then you invest full energy in that. And then stoicism is applied to the movement of the cycles around us. That seems like the healthiest approach.
And I really like what you said, like the things that are in the locus of my control, then I apply full energy to that. And I think that, you know, just to answer this question a little bit more, because I think that a point that I was trying to say before, but I couldn't like put it into words or get it across, but I have my bearings about me now, is that I think that there is, again, these extremes of, should I be in fear or should I rejoice? Is it boring or is it sensational? You know, does it catch my interest or I'm moving on to the next thing, pressing the button next, right? And I think that this becomes very like an escapist kind of mentality of like, to use contemporary language, not doing the work, right? And I'm saying that ironically. I'm saying that ironically because I think that when people say like doing the work, they don't really even know what doing the work means. Sorry if I'm coming off as critical, but I think that there does need to be a lot of energy focused into like my locus of control, my choices. So it's like I'm over here on social media saying I'm gonna do the work, and then I'm going to the porn shop, you know, or whatever it may be, like whatever example it may be. I'm gonna do the work, but then I'm, you know, hating on white people just as much as whatever, you know, whatever it is, right? So this doing of the work, I feel like is such one of these weird platitude terms that just gets so overused. However, one thing that I will say about that, and it's the point that I was trying to make, is that I think that there's not that I think, there is not emphasis in our society on like tapasya and austerity and like discipline and this idea that just repeating slogans in your mind or, you know, empty platitudes will just automatically like ail society's needs, right? Like a hashtag is going to ail society's needs. And it's like, no, it's not. There's this idea of discipline, of sacrifice, of austerity, of like having to go through severe practice. And I'll just give a personal example on this. I used the word in a recent post that I wrote. I used the word like the mind and the body need to be dominated, right? They need to be dominated because they have to be taken under the control of the self. And someone did not like that.
Right.
And they were like, this word seems very negative, you know, it doesn't seem positive, and like, you know, I think it would be rather to like integrate and this. None of what they were saying was incorrect. And I was just like, yeah, thank you for your opinion. But I think this idea of not wanting to be so hard on yourself, like it's kind of like to our detriment in our sense, you know, because it's like, actually, if we do let control of the reins, it's like, I mean, we don't need to go there. We don't need to embarrass ourselves with personal examples. But like, we've all had those dark moments in our life where we've let go of the reins, where we're just like, I don't care. I'm gonna just do what I want, or whatever it is, depression, hopelessness, whatever it might be that's leading us into bad choices. So really it takes like a concerted effort, if not dominating those choices and being like, I am the sovereign. I am the ruler of my choices. I am the ruler of my domain. But a lot of the times people don't like to think in this way. I don't know why. Maybe it's toxic positivity. Everything needs to be like rainbows and clouds and unicorns all the time. But it's like, this is something that's very common in our shastra, you know, this idea of like, boom, like it needs to be intense. It needs to be, you know, guru, this idea of having a guru. People don't like this idea, but guru means heavy, you know, and the times that I remember my guru the most is when he's been heavy with me and just told me how it is and like, this is what needs to happen. And I'm like, Okay, this is a hard pill to swallow, but you're right. You know, like you're right about it.
You reminded me of this verse, two verses from the Bhagavad, Kunti's prayers. So the first one is quite famous, where she prays for calamity. Not because she likes calamity per se, but when there was calamity in her life, Krishna always appeared. So that calamity served as a sort of stimulus for profound remembrance of God. So bring on the calamity. In the very next verse, it's a sort of hypothetical objection is offered. Well, if you don't care about calamities or reversals in life happening to you, what is it that you are afraid of? And so she sings this very beautiful verse also that, wealth, aristocracy, knowledge, and beauty, these have the tendency to expand one's pride. And when pride is expanded, no one can feelingly offer themselves up to a higher reality, to the highest reality, which is available for those who are devoid of possessions and therefore devoid of such pride. And one of our commentators, Sri Vishwanath, he writes a one-line commentary, says that the real danger is comfort in this world. And so our society has coddled the modern Western, postmodern Western world, and which has become the template for many societies. They have, it's based on sense gratification, so the tendency is for coddling the culture. And we have to suffer the consequences of being coddled in that way. Just as you were referring to my mom, how we got trained, at our house, if you stepped out of line, I'll never forget seeing my 3-year-old cousin, 3-year-old cousin. She hit my aunt, and my aunt looked at her and says, "Hold your hand out." And she had to hold her hand out, and then she just hit her hand. Not super hard, but enough to let her know that she was the authority. And that was just common growing up. That was just how you train children. And you see other people who didn't get that training, and you're just you were coddled, but now it has its consequences. So yeah, we're seeing that our inability to embrace, as the phrase may be going, our trials by fire. I kind of realized this and experienced this in my own life, that whenever I was able to embrace a fire, tapasya, right? Then I kind of assimilated the heat and light that fire had to offer, because I embraced it. It was painful, but in embracing it, you got infused with its power, so to speak, of illumination and its power of heat. And then I was able to move on in the next period of my life with potency because of doing so. And I also have the experience of not embracing that fire, but it coming anyway. So because of trying to run away from it, when it inevitably came upon me, I was not able to inherit the light and heat that embrace would have offered. And instead, I just got burned by it. And it took me a lot more time to bring myself together and move forward. That was really poetic. I'm
I was right about to say. I was like,
that was
really beautiful.
I gotta write that down before I forget. Where my pen at? I have never used that analogy ever before in my life, but
it's an amazing analogy. As you were saying it, I could see it. I was like, it makes so much sense. Oh, that was gorgeous.
So we're running away from our fires, and the conflagration is coming anyway, and we're being consumed by it. And the net result of that running away or avoidance, well, I think our culture is basically our at the root of a lot of our problems is the avoidance issue. We're just not facing our demons. We're not facing those fires, those trials by fire, and so on. It's an avoidance problem at the core of our culture. And so the net worth of all that avoidance is you get to suffer. That's just what it is. We get to suffer. What to do? Nothing. You would have suffered anyway, but you could have suffered in a way where you could have expanded your inner world. As you know, I posted some memes on my Facebook page that caused a little bit of drama. And anyway, we got incidentally some really healthy dialogue has started to come out of that. And anyway, in the course of one conversation where a person was having some issue with me, and we were kind of working that out respectfully, in the course of the conversation, he had mentioned in one of his responses that he has suffered great loss over the last year. And it was mentioned as a side, like as a side thing, but I it was there, and I kind of zoomed in on that, and I didn't want to respond without commenting on that, like without responding to that part also, because usually you get like in the heat of like arguing or trying to win a conversation or something, and people are like inserting the more human parts of what they're experiencing, where they're coming from, and we just like kind of just gloss over that and get to the part where we can like defeat the competition. So I noticed that I noted that part carefully, and I had a little response. And at the end of the response, I said, I'm sorry for all the losses that you experienced in the last year. May they be the seeds for your flourishing in the hereafter. And I was proud of myself for seeing that and saying that. I'm sorry. I have a lot of pride, as you can see. Don't hold it against me. I'm human. I'm frail. I'm weak. I'm retarded. I'm really gratification. I only occasionally think of these things when I'm putting on a show, as I'm doing now. Just being like, I said that like I meant it also as much as I could mean it from my heart, that may that loss be the seed of further flourishing. So we haven't been taught that our suffering can transform into meaning. And be beautiful and be wonderful. I mean, after all, seeds grow in the darkness of soil. So we haven't really been taught. So all we've been taught to do is kind of like somehow try to avoid, somehow try to run. And in doing so, it catches up with us anyway, because it's the material world. And now we're left without the ability to integrate those experiences in a way that we can blossom and bring light and beauty to our world around us. And so, so coming back to our other conversation, you have all these people gathering who don't know how to integrate suffering in their life. And therefore, the net result of all of that avoidance and not knowing how to integrate those experiences is that we just increase the suffering. So all we're doing here in this today's chit chat is trying to make a case for authentic spiritual life. Like, grab it. That's the real revolution. It's a revolution of consciousness. It's a revolution and transformation of the inner world. This could help that man who killed those people. If he had got the opportunity and time, he could have been helped. It could have helped this whole world, can heal this world also. May people be blessed with an authentic spiritual consciousness, a spiritual path that can lead them to that.
I love that. I love that so much. And thank you for your beautiful poetic language. You were going off into a poetry land there.
I entered the world there.
I really enjoyed it. I felt like I was at a spoken word. I was like, yes. No, but I think that that's really what it comes down to, you know, just to amplify your message even more, that like, you know, here in Chit Chat, we keep things a little bit like chit chatty and just like this, for lack of a better adjective. But I think like the reality of it is that our push for that, you know, we use this language at the beginning of the talk, for that catharsis, for that thing that needs to purge society of its ills, is a authentic spiritual life. You know, like that's really what it is. And I think that the more sensationalized, the more divided, the more my side, you're wrong, I'm wrong, it obfuscates the truth that is already there, to use the language that you use, right? And it launches me into darkness. It launches me into ignorance. So yeah, that's our genuine hope here on Chit Chat. And also very much knowing that our chit needs to be worked on too, all of our chit.
I promise you, I'm acutely aware of it.
Me too.
I'm acutely aware of how I need to get my chit together. It's terrible. It's embarrassing.
Me too. But this was such a awesome chit chat, and we'll be here next week at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We took a little break last week, but we're back. We're back, and soon, Jaya, will be on the same coast. We'll be in the same place very soon.
Very excited.
Very soon. So maybe we'll be able to do these chit chats in person, which would be fun.
It will be.
So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for all your beautiful comments. Kavi and Anthony and Priti and Nahush, your questions. Shikshastika, thank you so much, Prabhu, for putting up all those comments. And Madhava Puri, so grateful. And Deva Madhava Prabhu for being here. And thank you, Jai Jagannath. And we'll see you all next week at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hari Bol.
Hari.